Good morning. My name is Arth McGowan-Plant, and I am the Executive Director of the Center for Social Science Research and Policy here at the University of Manitoba. The CSSRP, as we call it, is a center in the Faculty Arts at the University of Manitoba in Winnipeg, Manitoba, Canada. One of the center's mandates is to provide public policy talks. And these talks are to help people understand some of the current issues that are affecting both the political, social, and economic scene within the Canadian context. So today I have the honor and the pleasure to do a follow-up interview with Dr. Royce Koop. Dr. Koop is the Associate Chair and Professor in Political Studies at the University of Manitoba. His research spans several topics, including themes related to representation and political parties in Canada, as well as both in the Canadian and comparative contexts. Today's interview will focus on the post-election results in Canada's federal election, which was held on Monday, April the 28th. From the election results, we currently have Liberals with 170 seats, the Conservatives with 143, the Bloc Québécois at 23, the New Democratic Party, or the NDP, with 7 seats, and the Green Party with 1 seat, representing the House of Commons. Please note that before we begin, the answers to these questions represent Dr. Koop's political expertise and do not necessarily reflect those of the Centre or the University of Manitoba. So thank you, Dr. Koop, for joining me today. It's a pleasure to have you here to share your expertise on the post-election results with the Canadian election. I have several questions that I'd like to ask you, but I would also leave some time after our interview to allow you the opportunity to add any type of questions or comments that you'd like to add. So thank you for joining me today.
Thanks for having me.
So let's begin with the first question. Based on your predictions from the pre-election event, please comment on the election results, and as well if you have any differences in what your predictions were and what happened.
I can't totally remember exactly what I predicted, but I think one thing I did predict was that we were going to get a majority government. At the end of the campaign, the polls seemed to be suggesting that Mark Carney and the Liberals had enough support, and it was distributed in such a way that he would get a majority government. And you always have to keep in mind that the electoral system that we have in Canada, single member plurality, it's designed to produce majority governments. The only reason we haven't gotten majority governments is because we've had a lot of small, minor parties in the Canadian Parliament, or in the last, especially the last 2 elections, the Bloc, the NDP, now the Greens as well. That didn't happen. Now, right now, the Liberals are at 170. They're just 2 seats away from a majority, so I was close in that respect. But part of the reason that didn't happen is because the Conservatives and Mr. Poilievre did better in Ontario than I thought they would, than a lot of people thought they would. I thought that the Liberals would take that lead that they had in Ontario and they would just sweep across the province. They would win a huge number of seats with a pretty small margin of votes. And that actually didn't happen. The Conservatives overperformed in Ontario, and they got a good result from Ontario. Now, the Liberals and the Conservatives both increased their votes and their seats, including in Ontario. And in Ontario, which of course is the biggest province, the most people, the most seats, there's now only Liberal and Conservative members of Parliament. The New Democrats were wiped out in Ontario. And so I think that's a big reason why we got a minority instead of a majority, although it was, as I say, it was quite close. One thing that I thought is that we're moving more towards 2-party politics in Canada. The polls were kind of clearly indicating that the smaller parties weren't going to do as well in this election. And that was not a very daring prediction. You just have to look at the polls, but that certainly turned out to be true. The Bloc lost, I think maybe 10 seats in Quebec, and the NDP it's the worst result that they've had in modern history. The NDP, which runs candidates across the country, actually got fewer votes than the Bloc, which only runs candidates in Quebec. That's a remarkable result. And so the NDP only won 7 seats. They won't be an official party in Parliament unless the other parties agree to give them that. And their leader stepped down, Jagmeet Singh, so they're going to have a leadership race. But this is a party that's in very real trouble. And you know, the Greens only won their 1 seat. And so, yeah, it does seem like Canada is moving towards a 2-party type of competition, with the exception of Quebec. Quebec has the Bloc. The Bloc isn't really going to go anywhere. They can win seats forever. But it does seem like we're moving in that direction. Big thing that is interesting, what's going to happen to the NDP? Does the NDP rebuild? Does it make a comeback or not? That's going to have real consequences for how we understand Canadian politics moving forward.
Okay, well, thank you very much for following up with your predictions from the pre-election event. Just a bit in terms of responding to what you had just said. As you mentioned, the Liberals now have 170 seats. They need 172 to earn that majority government. Do you think that with some of the recounts going on, or possibly they are sort of courting some other parties' MPs, that they could achieve that goal?
Yeah, it could happen. There are recounts happening, and at least one, there's a possibility that the seat could flip to the Conservatives rather than the Liberals. They could lose a seat. There's a kind of remarkable situation right now in a Quebec seat where it turns out a Liberal candidate won by 1 vote. But that is far from over. Now we're getting reports that there are people that voted for the Bloc. Their votes weren't counted. They had mail-in ballots returned to them. And so I'm not sure. It's very hard to say if they eventually make it to 170. They might try to poach MPs from other parties. I'm not sure if that'll happen. I think the important point is that even if the Prime Minister Carney doesn't make it to 172 seats, he can govern at least in the short and probably the medium term on the basis of the fact that the other parties don't want an election right now. The NDP is in a shambles. They have a leadership race they have to get through. They had so little money in this election campaign. They didn't have a campaign plan. Jagmeet Singh was traveling around on a bus, mostly in Ontario. So they don't want an election, and the Bloc has said they're not going to defeat the government for at least a year. And so whether or not Carney makes it to 172 seats, it's probably less important than we think it is. You know, the Prime Minister is going to be able to govern. He does have probably at least 2 to 3 years in a minority parliament.
Okay, thank you very much for following up with that. The next question is, what 2 things do you believe made a difference to the election outcome? Could you identify 2 different things you thought that really were significant?
Yeah, it was Trump. This election, the Conservatives and Pierre Poilievre were ahead forever, you know, year and a half, 2 years before this election, on the basis of bread and butter issues, inflation, home prices, cost of living, concerns about the immigration system. And all of that flipped when Donald Trump came into office. He won that election, and he began to threaten to make Canada the 51st state and then introduce tariffs on this country. It reshuffled the deck. It short-circuited Canadian politics. And so Trump impacted the election campaign, and that influence was there right from the beginning. But the other person that it was Carney himself. I don't think we realized how unpopular Justin Trudeau was, and how much he was dragging the Liberal Party down. We knew he was unpopular, but when he was gone, when Carney was selected as his replacement, you know, the party's fortunes just skyrocketed. They jumped ahead of the Conservatives, not by a huge amount, but to be behind for so long and then to immediately go back into the lead. It speaks to the importance of those 2 factors, as Trump and Carney, that made a difference to the election campaign. Now, this campaign the Prime Minister took advantage of that popularity. He called a snap election. He has the power to do that, to request a dissolution. He also called the shortest possible campaign that's required by law. And so the point here was to limit his exposure. He's an inexperienced politician, limit the extent to which he can make mistakes. And that's what the short campaign was designed to do. It's also the case that Mr. Carney took 3 breaks during the campaign. He suspended his campaign 3 times to go back to Ottawa to deal with alleged threats from the Trump administration. And there's a lot of evidence, the parties, the Conservatives and the Liberals, got closer and closer as the election went on. And there's a lot of evidence that the election was, won. If it had lasted a week longer, things might have flipped. They certainly would have been closer. And so I think those are the 2 things, that made a difference. The issues that we thought were going to be defining issues, they were important issues: the cost of living, inflation, home prices. And in fact, when you ask Canadians what are the most important issues, those were still the most important, top of mind issues for Canadians. But Trump intruded into the election, I think made a big difference. As he himself said when he met with Mark Carney after the election, I think that I was the biggest benefit to your campaign. I think there's a lot of truth to that.
Right, and just building on what you said in terms of what the Canadian citizens thought were, major issues. There was much discussion within the media saying that it really was about who they thought was best to represent Canada and respond to the threats from the Trump administration. Yeah. So certainly in terms of what you said, I would agree with that, and certainly made a big impact on the election result.
Yeah. I mean, Carney, has pretty substantial qualifications. He was seen as a competent manager, someone who's going to be good on economic issues. And they sold that during the campaign. This is someone who's been through crises, who's held important positions, and been through difficult times. So this is the person you want representing Canada in a kind of crisis situation. In 2025 it was Trump. In 2021 it was COVID. The Liberal government has now 2 elections in a row basically escaped accountability for its own actions in office. We've had these short-term issues, these short-term crises pop up, and the Liberals have been able to run successfully on the basis of those kinds of issues. Makes you wonder, when are the Liberals actually going to be able to run on their record, be accountable on the basis of their record as a government? We've now had them for like 10 years. Hopefully in the next election we actually get a chance to do that.
And yes, and in terms of what you said, that sort of aspect of crisis leadership, right? And many people look to leaders during crises and who they feel is best, represented to deal and respond to these issues, whether it be COVID or the Trump administration. So that's a very good point. Thank you for bringing that to our attention. Another question I have for you is, based on these results that we just discussed, can you suggest what you think will be the future for Canada's main political parties, and also as well for the future of Canada?
Yeah, I was talking earlier about the NDP, and I think that if you're interested in the kind of the future of Canadian politics, what's it going to look like? The NDP is the really interesting actor right now, because the key question is, does the party recover from this? Do they have a leadership race? Do they slowly build up their support so that they're winning 20, 30, 40 seats in the future? Now, how long does it take for that to happen? Or does the party kind of fall apart? Do they kind of fall in on themselves? They have a dysfunctional leadership race that produces maybe a bad leader that's unappealing. That kind of thing can happen as well. And that's important because, if the NDP is in the next election going to come and take back all these votes that they lost to the Liberals and the Conservatives, then that means that Canada's going to keep on going as a kind of multi-party system. But if they're just going to step in cow pie after cow pie, and they can't reclaim those voters, then they sort of recede into the background, then Canadian politics could look much more like other similar countries, the United Kingdom, Australia, the United States, where we become a 2-party system, with maybe the Bloc hanging on as a kind of distinct one province party. And that's going to make a big difference to our politics. Multi-party politics is very different than two-party politics. We're more likely to get majority governments. That's just one of the differences in what we would see in that type of politics than compared to what we see now. So the NDP, that's going to be the crucial question. The NDP is quite an interesting party in the provinces. It is just wildly successful. In half of the country, the NDP has displaced the Liberals. They full on defeated, stuck a stake through the heart of the Liberal Party. Just wildly successful in the provinces. But in federal politics has only once become the official opposition, only once beaten the Liberals in 2011, and since then it's just gone downhill. And so I think the idea of the party disappearing from federal politics actually is a possibility. We'll see how Carney governs. I think the concern for the government is that a lot of the things that kind of destroyed Trudeau's popularity, the substantive stuff. I mean, there's personal stuff. I think that after 9 years, Canadians just get tired of people. That's just the way it is. You burn through goodwill, and I think there was some personal antagonism there. But on a policy basis, what are the things that wrecked the Liberal Party's popularity? It was cost of living, home prices, concerns about immigration. All those sorts of things are still here, and they're going to get worse as a result of these tariffs. And so Carney, you say, oh, he's going to do great. He's going to be a much better prime minister. Well, he's still confronting all the exact same problems that Trudeau was confronting. The exact same things that made him unpopular. They haven't gone away. They didn't leave with Justin. They're still here, and so he has to deal with those. And I think it'd be very difficult. We've seen in other similar countries in the United Kingdom, Keir Starmer became the prime minister, and confronting a similar set of issues, his popularity just kind of tanked almost immediately. I mean, we could see the same thing happening to Carney. Conservatives are the most stable party right now. We know that Pierre Poilievre is going to continue to be the leader. The party can count on a pretty solid base of support, and they showed in this election they can actually increase that to around 40%. I'm not sure if that's true, actually. I need to check that number. But yeah, the Conservative Party is the most stable. They're going to hold on to their leader, organizationally strong. If Pierre Poilievre had stepped aside, or if he had been forced out, it would have been much more bigger question about the party. But right now, the party, I think, is in a very stable place.
Well, thank you for that. I really appreciate your response to that. And just if I can, with the next sort of question to this, based on these results, what do you think is the future for Canada overall? And as you suggested, there is a lot of instability right now, both politically and economically. But given the Prime Minister's leadership right now, how do you think that maybe he'll respond to that, and how will that sort of bode for the future of Canada overall? If you could just make some suggestions or recommendations on that.
Yeah, well, I think if Carney had been dependent on the NDP for survival, we would have got a government that would have been pretty free spending necessarily. They would have continued to be focused on NDP policy priorities. I don't think that's going to be the case now. The NDP is not in a position to defeat the government. Carney has a pretty free hand to do what he wants to with the government. He doesn't have to worry about being defeated in the short or the medium term. It's very hard to say. Today, the day we're recording this, is Cabinet Day. And roughly half of the ministers in Carney's cabinet were in Trudeau's cabinet, including all the big names, all the names that we clearly associate with that decade of Justin Trudeau as prime minister are still there. And so you really wonder, when you're doing that, how committed are you to addressing some of the problems that arose during Justin Trudeau's time as prime minister? I think that's a little bit concerning. And as I said before, all those problems are still here, and they're getting worse. We know that the Liberal government under Trudeau did a U-turn on immigration issues. Well, now we're learning that a lot of the problems that came out of mismanagement of immigration in this country, we're just now beginning to learn about the consequences of that. There's still a lot of work, a lot of capital that needs to be burned to address that, and 100 other issues that cropped up when Justin Trudeau was Prime Minister. And I'm not convinced after today that Carney is entirely committed to addressing those. If he were, I think we would have seen a very different cabinet. So I'm not sure about the future. It could be a rocky few years.
Okay, well, thank you so much for sharing your perspectives on Canada's federal election results. And would you like to make any additional comments at this time, or any additional perspectives that you'd like to add?
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that political scientists talk about is regionalization. You know, to what extent were the results regionalized? And right after the election, what we saw is things happening in Alberta. You know, Albertans, people in Saskatchewan are disappointed in the results, and they feel that despite the fact that the previous government, you know, they weren't supportive of infrastructure pipelines to get our energy products to markets other than the United States. And so they're frustrated about that. You re-elect a government that is hostile to the interests of Alberta. And so we've seen some talk about separatism. Certainly what we should expect is, you know, to the extent that there's regional discontent, regional division in this country, it'll be related to Western Canada, not Quebec. You know, Quebec is comparably quiet at the moment, but we'll get that kind of discontent from Western Canada, especially Alberta, and we might actually get sovereignty issue. We might get a referendum in Alberta. We might actually have a national unity crisis in this country, but in Alberta rather than Quebec. But you know, despite that, the regionalization is actually it kind of became less important in 2025. You know, the Liberal Party is popular in Atlantic Canada. The Conservatives are ultra popular in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But besides that, we see not necessarily balanced, but we see more balanced competition. In Quebec, the Liberals did quite well. In Ontario, the Conservatives did better than we thought they would. Liberals and Conservatives are pretty balanced in British Columbia. And so, you know, the days of a highly regionalized, antagonistic Canadian Parliament, we saw that in the 1990s, and it kind of made a comeback in the last two elections. I think we're kind of leaving that in the rearview mirror. Now, despite that, we still have regional tensions. We're going to hear a lot about this. But, you know, as a whole, you know, the parties, the major parties, you know, they have representation from pretty much every region, the exception being the Liberals. They did very poorly on the prairies in Alberta and Saskatchewan. But even there, they won a few seats. And so, you know, regionalization is not going to be as intense, I think, in the future as it was maybe in the past.
Okay. Well, thank you so much for sharing your comments today. I really appreciate that, and your additional perspectives as well. And again, I just want to thank everybody for your interest in watching this interview today, and for following us. We really appreciate the opportunity to share with you Dr. Koop's perspectives on the pre-election and now the post-election results. If you like what you heard today, we ask that you please like or subscribe to this video. And as well, if you have any questions at all, please feel free to reach out to the Center for Social Science Research and Policy. We can be reached at our email address at cssrp@umanitoba.ca, or as well through any of our social media channels. Thank you again, and thank you, Dr. Koop. We really appreciate the opportunity to interview you again.
Oh, thank you.
Thanks for joining. Bye-bye.